So we have all 7 members plus the chair present. Madam Clerk, are you ready?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Hey, we can hear you even better today. And I know Mr. Pearl is on. So it is 5:32 p.m. on Tuesday, May 26th, 2020, and this is the City of Homestead Ad-Hoc Review Charter Review Committee. I have to read a statement that due to COVID-19, this will be a virtual Ad-Hoc Charter Review Committee meeting. The city will be accepting public comments as part of the meeting, which can be emailed to publiccomments@cityofhomestead.com. Public comments will be made part of the record and included in the minutes. Public comments can be submitted 24 hours to the Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee meeting. Those comments are limited to 300 words per comment, and commenters are asked to provide your name and address for the record. So it appears that all 7 members of the committee are present.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Craig.
I'd like to make a comment before we start.
Sure.
Something I wanted to say at the last meeting that didn't have an opportunity. As you know, for our exchange of emails, I had expressed interest in discussing and concentrating on the issue of single district representation. And while you explained to me the time constraints and the need to get things on the ballot, which I completely understood and agree with, I was nevertheless a little disappointed. However, I was very encouraged when you expressed that you'd like the committee to continue to be active, to concentrate on that and other issues. And I just want to express my appreciation for your willingness to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I'm really kind of disappointed that we didn't have the time to, fully cover, but we've covered some major issues, and I think probably the priority issues, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to create another bundle of questions for or at least have the conversation and issue some recommendations to council. We have before us the minutes of the May 18th, 2020 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the meeting? None appearing. Do we have a motion for approval of those minutes?
So moved.
Is that you, Mr. Craig?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Moved by Mr. Craig and seconded by Mr. Maldonado. Is there any further discussion on the minutes? And as we do it at the TPO, would anyone like to be recorded as a no vote? Okay. None appearing. The minutes of the previous meeting stand approved. Based on some conversations that I had with our attorney and some thoughts that he and I both happened to have over the weekend, we want to deviate a little bit and briefly, hopefully briefly, from the stated agenda and go back and clarify some ancillary issues to those issues we have already discussed and voted on. And those are all related to the issue that we put forward regarding special election in certain circumstances to fill vacancies. Also, the issue of the vice mayor ballot proposal. So with that, Mr. Pearl?
Thank you, Mayor. I had 3 topics I wanted clarification on. Some things may require a subsequent change, others may not. The first major issue is we have decided now to place a question on the ballot so that presenting a special election if there is more than a year remaining in the term. As the charter is currently written, when somebody is appointed to fill a vacancy, because there was no special election, they were only appointed until the next regularly scheduled election. So theoretically, if somebody were to vacate their seat for any reason, during the first year of a 4-year term. If they were appointed, they would only serve until that next election, and the remainder of the 2 years would be filled at that election. Here, assuming that this passes and we end up filling vacancies of greater than a year by special election, I want to make sure, or at least I want some clarification from the body as to whether the intent would be, once we hold a special election, that election is for the remainder of the term, that we would not then have a special election and then, let's say, 1 year into a term, and then 1 year later place the remaining 2 years on the regularly scheduled election of the city. A little clarification on that. I assumed that we meant for the remainder of the term, but because of the way the charter is currently written, I wanted some clarification on the intent of the body there.
All right, open the floor for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, it was my understanding that it was for the remainder of the term, that the special election, it would not grandfather them into the next 2 or 4 year term. So I understood that the special election would be only for the remainder of the term that they are filling the seat for.
Well, that's what he's saying.
So is that what he wants?
Rather than an abbreviated term.
So, Mr. Pearl, is that what you're wanting direction on? You just want crystal clear clarification?
Yes. So historically, if there was an appointment made in the first half of a term, you would then have that person who filled that first half. Basically, if someone was appointed with 3 years left on a term, they would only serve for 1 year. And because we hold elections every 2 years, the last 2 years would be filled at an election. However, because we're proposing having a special election, my sense was that that the person who was elected at that special election would fill the next 3 years of the term with no need to have that interim election, because we would have had the special election the voters would have chosen. But I wanted to make sure that that was the intent of the body, just because historically, with the appointment process as it is now, once you got to that mid-term election, that 2 year term, the remainder 2 years would have been filled. I interpreted the discussion to mean that you would be filling the rest of that term, the full 3 years, if it were 3 years left, and that you wouldn't have to have that person run again for those intervening 2 years. And if that's the case, then that's fine. I want to make sure that we're crystal clear on that.
Okay. So, for example, let's say Elvis's term. Is that exactly what would have happened now?
No. Well, with Elvis's term, it was less than 2 years remaining at the time of his resignation. So if the charter provisions that we're proposing were in place, there would have been a special election for the remainder of the term, but the remainder of that term was less than 2 years, so there wouldn't have been a regularly scheduled city election in between the time of the special election and the time that term would have expired. If you had somebody resign following 1 year of a 4 year term, then you will have another election, another regularly scheduled election of the city, and there would be 2 years remaining in that term. But if we hold a special election after 1 year, that person could be elected for 3 years for the rest of that term at the special election, or the special election could carry them to the next regularly scheduled election of the city, which would only be 1 year down the road, and then that person or somebody else could run for the remaining 2 years of that term. So you either want the special election to carry you through for the remainder of the term, or just until the next regularly scheduled election of the city, in which case somebody theoretically could run in a special election and only hold that seat for 6 months before they have to run again. So it's entirely up to you. I was looking for some clarification on the intent.
Understood.
I don't think that, if I can, Mayor, I don't think that I don't know, did everyone, I guess we don't really think of all those details. That's obviously why we have Matt Pearl there to bring up this question. And so I think it makes a good point. So we're just trying to figure out, you know, it's really if it's more than because all cycles are 4 years. In my case, it was 2 years, so it's no in that sense. But because if it's a 3-year, or let's say someone just won a 4-year term, and 6 months later he gets an offer, a job in Washington D.C. Hey guys, I got to go. You know, then the council. So then the council would then, because now here's a question, Matt. I guess so if we leave it as is, then the person who assumes the position will automatically serve out those 3 years. So basically, you're asking us to say, hey, do you guys, is that okay for that person?
No, see, not exactly. And because we contemplate now no special election, and we only contemplate appointment. The appointment, as the charter is written now, if someone were to vacate the seat in your scenario, 6 months into a 4-year term, they would be appointed, and then at the next election, even though technically that seat wouldn't be up for election, the remaining 2 years of that term, the appointment would only take you to the next election. But now we're contemplating having that seat that's vacated 6 months into the term filled by a special election. So the question is, do you want to make that person run twice, once in a special election and then again to fill at the next regularly scheduled election for the remaining 2 years? Or are we satisfied that the voters have had their say at the special election, and regardless of how much time is left in the term, that special election whoever's elected will fulfill the remainder of that term?
I don't think it'd be fair to demand that a candidate runs twice. If they've been elected once by a special election, I think they should serve out the rest of the term. That's the only fair way to do it.
I think the language is. Hold on 1 second. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone that is in that seat because of a special election, that should go into the next scheduled election for that seat. It's just too easy to say that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess that's what I was thinking. If we did a special election for that, for that person, that was an election. So I would be okay with that carrying over to the next.
The balance of the term.
The balance of the term.
To carry over to the next election cycle. To that seat's next election cycle.
The balance of the term for that seat, not necessarily the next election of the city. So that's the distinction.
And the distinction I feel with the system we have now is that we did not want to appoint someone for a term in excess of 2 years. Now, that's the reason why you would have a midterm election, so to speak. But here they're standing for election on their own. To me, it stands to reason that special election should be for the entire balance of that term, whatever it is.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree as well.
And I agree.
I agree as well.
So sounds as though you have unanimity.
It sounds that way. Okay. Perfect.
Next item.
Okay. The next piece is, we had discussed, actually, I'll stick with the filling of the vacancy and then we'll come back. Now, as we're proposing now, you have any term in which there's a vacancy, if it's less than a year remaining in the term, it'll be filled by appointment. And the way we have it now is if there were 6 months or greater in that term, then it was that that vacancy would be filled by appointment of the mayor with the process that we just used. And, we're going to propose adjusting the time frame from 60 to 90 days, but with a mandatory attempt at an appointment. Whereas if there's less than 6 months remaining in the term, then it was at the mayor's discretion whether or not they wanted to appoint a person to fill just the last few months.
And that's the current scenario.
That's the current scenario. So I want to make sure that is the intent to leave that in place just the way that it is. And if that's the case, then what it will read is, if it's greater than a year, you'll have a special election. Under a year, it'll be filled by appointment. And that appointment process will have an A and a B. A will be 6 months or more, and that'll be an appointment.
Like we just did.
Like we just did, basically, with, the caveat that we may go to a 90-day window. Or, and B, if it's less than 6 months, then the discretion to leave the seat vacant for those few months remains.
And that's all
and I
we
want to
got
make
now.
Yes, and I want to make sure that that's the intent here, to leave that construct in place, because we didn't really talk about that.
Yeah,
Everybody-
that makes sense to me.
Everybody else follow that? Right now, if there's a vacancy of 6 months or less, the mayor has the discretion to leave it vacant. And more than 6 months, we go through the appointment process, 6 to 12 months. Anything more than 12, we're proposing to have special election. So what we're clarifying for Mr. Pearl is that we're leaving that 6-month discretion of leaving the seat vacant in place.
Mr. Mayor, I don't want to be too cynical, but I always think of the worst case scenario. And if we're going to go 6 months and with only 6 members of the council, aren't we faced with the possibility of a lot of 3-3 ties?
That's always in the realm of possibility, but with the 90-day window, you're faced with almost a certainty of half of that number.
Mhm.
I mean, and the charter now provides the discretion to leave it open.
Let's just kind of have a overall question real quick. 6 months, or just simple conversation. There's 6 months left there's a vacancy open, and what Mr. Craig just mentioned was that this does happen, and I think that the 6-6 would negatively affect a good project just because one person. I mean, that one person makes a difference. And we've seen when that one person's not there, it could have been a good project, but because that one person, that's a tiebreaker. So the question is, how quick can we get someone in that seat? And I get the maybe the rationale. Like, if it takes 90 days to appoint someone, then why even appoint someone? Because they'll be, we'll only be there for another 90 days, and then we're done, right? I think that's kind of the thought process. But 6 months, a lot does happen within a city that could negatively impact the city, I believe, if you don't have that 7th person there, that's the tiebreaker. You could test it out, but I'd hate to see. I mean, I've seen projects because one person didn't show up that would have been that tiebreaker be lost. So that's my concern. My concern is that 6 months is a lot can and does happen within 6 months. We can't look at our current situation now where we have this COVID and everything is on lockdown and everything's kind of crazy. But, if you go back to when everything is on a normal basis, a lot happens in 6 months. And I think that not having a balanced council up there could negatively impact some of these good projects. That's just my 2 cents. Just want to just kind of put that out there for the record and have that conversation. So I guess the question that I would have is, how do we, is it possible to, we talk about the 90 days, but isn't there a shorter window that we could, let's say if everyone's on board on an appointee, let's say the mayor says, I'm going to grab so-and-so person, and everyone's like, you know what, that's a great person. We need that person up there. There's not a back and forth about it. Boom, you could get it done in what, 45 days maybe? I don't know how quick, Mr. Mayor, you think that could possibly happen.
Well, to answer your question, and based on my experience from both sides of the table, I would think that by the time you advertise, and by the time you collect the documents from the interested parties, and the entire council has a chance to interview them separately, and you bring it to a meeting with a very collegial council, 45 days is probably the very shortest period of time that you would have before you would be able to fill a vacancy by appointment.
And I think that's a good. I think if it was me, if I was in that position, I would say, okay, let's give it a shot. It's part of everything else we're doing. We're not going to do any special call meeting or anything. Let's just go the regular route. There's a vacancy. Submit your applications. Like, everyone should know what to be doing when this happens. Okay, we got to, like yourself. I mean, you knew the day that I was gone, that the clock was ticking, so you got to work right away. And so I applaud you for that, because you helped that process get there as quick as possible. And I think if staff and that everyone would know what to do, then you could get those applications in, you could go through the process, you could have the meetings, and I believe in 45 days you could have an option. Now, in 45 days, nothing happens. You don't have that team, like you said, the collegial team that's going to just go ahead and get this person in. Then at that point, I said, hey, at least we tried. I think, at this point, we see that this is either contentious or it's a mixed, council, and we'll just kind of let this ride out, and we'll pick it up in 6 months. But at least you gave it a shot. I'd like to see at least that happen. I wouldn't want to see that, hey, 6 months, you're not going to, in 3 months, it's going to be hard, and, it's not going to happen, so just forget it. We'll kick this can down the road. My 2 cents. I'll pause and let the rest of my colleagues chime in.
Mr. Mayor, my basic principle has always been that I would like to have a full 7-member city council as soon as possible, and reduce the time at which we have less than a full city council to the bare minimum. If that can be expedited in some way or other, or guaranteed, or some process put in place that we minimize the time that we do not have a full city council, then I will be satisfied.
Okay.
I agree. Sounds like fulfilling the position, at least giving it a shot within that first 45-day window. It makes sense. I agree.
Well, Matt, would it maybe be in terms of leaving that basic framework there, that if the vacancy is for 6 months or less, the mayor is obligated to submit a nominee, but if that nominee is not approved, then the seat may remain vacant in the mayor's discretion. Because as the charter is written now, it doesn't default to council control. It just says the mayor may, paraphrase, the mayor may or may not submit a nominee. So would that address the issues that have been raised here today by the committee members who would like to see a full council if possible?
I mean, it can certainly be amended to provide that, the mayor shall within X number of days, and if, pick your time frame, let's say.
Well, we could go back to the 60 we have.
to submit a name, whatever you feel comfortable with, at least proposing the name. And if that's not approved, then the seat can remain vacant for the remainder of the term. The mayor can, in his discretion, can, if that's the power that we want to give him, then we can do that. Because as it stands now, the mayor has the authority to do it within 6 months or not. If he does, it has to be approved by the council as it would otherwise. So that section can be amended to say, if there's less than 6 months, the mayor must submit a name for nomination within 60 days. If the mayor's nominee is not approved and the vacancy is not filled, then the mayor can, in his discretion, allow the seat to remain vacant.
Well, would it be better to say that the mayor will submit a name not later than 45 days from the date of the vacancy, and the council has, it's all in the timing of the council meetings.
Yeah.
The mayor can propose any time, or, within 45, I guess. But the approval could take up to the 60, which is what we have now for the mayor's exclusive window. Is that?
So we could do that. So I guess the question is, do you want to base it on the nomination? Do you want the language to be based on the nomination and approval, or do you want the nomination or on a time frame? Because theoretically, in 60 days, if you did a turnaround quick, the mayor could nominate a subsequent person. So I'm just trying to understand what you want to accomplish, so I can craft the language accordingly.
Well, I'm trying to split the baby with real-time logistics and the concerns of the committee members who I perceive want to avoid having a 6-member council for up to 6 months.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly what I think. Matthew, I would really appreciate the words shall or must as opposed to the words may.
So the mayor shall submit a name for nomination within, okay. Yeah, either way, a definitive, an obligation on the mayor within 45 days. Okay? Shall submit a name 45 days. Within 45 days. If that person is not approved, then do we want to allow the seat to remain vacant? That's the trigger that I understand the initial trigger, but at what point are we okay letting it go, if we are at all?
Well, I think that's where Councilman Maldonado was coming from. At least give it one shot.
Right. I guess, is that something, Matt, once, let's say we leave it, let's say we put the language to where, the mayor submits his name, you do it within the 45, 60 days. It doesn't, let's say if it fails, the language right now, it says then he could just say, we'll just leave the seat open, right? But what happens when this charter question goes to the council, when they have this discussion on all the charter amendments? At that moment, they could have a discussion about modifying it to what the majority would like to see. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So
Matthew,
I think.
Excuse me, Elvis.
Yes. Yeah. So go ahead, so you don't lose your train of thought.
Matthew, it say that the mayor submits the name within 45 days. That the name is not approved. Then what options do we have to avoid leaving the seat vacant?
Well, and I'm asking you what you would like to do, because there are a couple. If we're trying to leave some discretion in the hands of the mayor as to whether or not at that point the seat should be filled, then we just say we can make an obligation to take a crack at it to a point, and if it's not approved, then allow the mayor to leave it vacant, or you eliminate that discretion and you just treat it all the same, and there's an obligation for the mayor to appoint somebody, and there's no guarantee that somebody's approved and the council reaches a consensus, but if the driving concern is doing the most to try to fill the seat, then in theory you could eliminate that discretion. It's really up to you. I'm just looking for clarification.
Let me throw this out, because right now we've got two separate paragraphs, 6 months or more or 6 months or less.
Yes.
Okay. And now we're at the point where we're saying if there is more than 12 months remaining, it will be filled by election. So the assumption is less than 12 months will be filled by appointment. What if we just said if 60 days or less, the mayor can leave it open, and more than 60 days and up to a year, we leave that to the current appointment process?
I think that works because realistically it could take 60 days to appoint somebody.
That's right.
So you're shortening, I think that definitely works. It shortens the window of time during which there could be an acceptable vacancy to basically the time frame within which it would likely take to appoint somebody. And then everything that goes beyond that 60 days, you're going to go through the process, and it results in somebody being seated or not, but you're going through the process. So that is certainly another way to address it.
Mr. Mayor, say that one more time, please. One more time.
Okay,
Run this scenario by him.
Well, and maybe we want to make it 90 to comport with the 90 we've given the mayor, but Julio, what I said is that unless the vacancy is for 0 to 60 days, and we might want to talk about making it 90 to match the proposed new window, but let's say for sake of conversation, if the vacancy is for between 60 days and 1 year, the current appointment process remains in effect.
Okay.
Now, the only twist there would be if we're proposing to extend the mayor's window to 90, do we want this provision to be consistent with that?
Well, to be clear, the current appointment process is if taking you out of the proposition, Mr. Mayor, that a mayor submits a name, the name is not approved, then members of the council then submit a name, or we go through the field as we did earlier.
Currently under the, I'm sorry, Mayor. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, currently under the charter, I think, Mr. Craig, you went a step too far. Currently under the charter, there is a 60-day window within which the mayor has the exclusive ability to nominate somebody to fill the vacancy. At the conclusion of that 60-day window, then it becomes open and any member of the council can nominate somebody if the mayor's nominees have not been approved within 60 days. The procedural aspects and limiting that to the field of applicants, those rules don't exist in the charter, and the initial steps are in the code, and we'll address, I think the recommendation will be to flush out and formally adopt the process that was just used as the codified method. But the charter only speaks to the exclusive window for nomination of the mayor.
Well, thank you. That was my understanding, that we would just continue the process we just went through. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more question, again, just for this, the special election cost. Did we have a number for the cost of a special election? Last time I think we mentioned it.
No, I'm not aware that we do. And again, it depends upon early voting, whether or not we declare it a vote by mail election only. There are a lot of variables there.
Okay. So let me ask one more question. In regards to the process, we defined the process of how, where the mayor and council, when you're within that window of the mayor and council selecting someone, not going to special election, is that clearly defined at this point? Did we clearly define it? Because I think that for some reason I'm under the assumption that I like the process that happened last time where the mayor gets a shot. If the time finishes, he's not able to appoint someone, then it goes into a voting process. Is that defined already as well?
What's defined is in the charter is the mayor's exclusive window, which we're proposing to extend from 60 days to 90 days. And the allowance of the council to then nominate somebody else. The procedure for those nominations and the procedures for the mayor's nomination currently exist in Chapter 10 of the Code, not the charter. Mm-hmm. And Chapter 10 of the Code outline the process for the mayor's solicitation of resumes, consideration of candidates, and submission of those candidates to the council, but was silent on what happens if the mayor's nominee is ultimately not approved and the council wanted to nominate somebody else. Because it was silent, the council basically utilized, it was, theoretically under the charter, somebody could have nominated anybody off the street, but the council all agreed that that was not the way it should go. And so everybody agreed that we would hold a vote on an election in accordance with Robert's rules of and that election would consist of each of the people who had submitted their names and would exclude anybody else. So only the initial applicants were allowed to be considered. And as we've had this discussion, it seems that everybody was in favor of that process and appreciated the process. They thought that was fair. So what I would suggest is among the recommendations, and we did discuss this previously, is that as we move forward, one of the recommendations is that the code be amended, Chapter 10 of the code be amended, to formally codify the procedures that we just used, and that would be the mechanism, the avenue to address that.
Okay,
I
just want to
support that. We should codify the procedure that we just went through.
And again, that, in my view, when we talk about it, would be one of our recommendations as ancillary to the charter questions.
Mr. Mayor, going back to your comment about staying consistent with, instead of 0 to 60 days, 0 to 90 days, it just makes it for a more clear, concise language. Because then that means a person that's 1 year or less, if it takes 90 days to get in there, they still have 7 months to serve.
Yeah.
So just adding the 60 days would just confuse people more, in my opinion.
Well, the 60 days is, yeah. And I would hope that the committee, if we're going to go that route, and we've already voted on that the mayor's exclusive window of opportunity be extended to 90 days, that the language about leaving it open for 90 days would be consistent with that proposed time frame. 90 across the board.
I concur.
That works for me.
Okay.
All right, so do we have a motion to that effect? The last one we were okay, but this is new ground, I think.
I'll move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Moved by Councilman Guzman.
If there's any confusion, if there's anyone online that needs a kind of a quick re-explanation by Mr. Pearl, ask now.
Would you like me just my basic understanding of what we're doing here?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just to read it right before so they're all clear,
No.
and even in the minutes.
My pleasure. So, I'm sorry, I'm getting a feedback. My understanding of where we are is the motion is to adopt the mayor's suggestion, which is that we will effectively take that 6-month window within which it could have been left vacant and shorten it to be 90 days so that 90-day time frame is consistent with his window to appoint. So that if there's a vacancy with less than 90 days, that it's the mayor's discretion to not try to appoint. Anything between 91 days in the year, then we will just go forward with the nomination and appointment process
as exists now.
as exists. Is that correct, Mayor?
That's correct. Do we have a second
Okay.
to Mr. Guzman's
I'll
motion?
second that one.
All right, we have a second by Councilman Maldonado. Is there any further discussion? Would anyone like to be recorded as a no vote? None appearing then, let's let the record reflect that this was passed unanimously. And final, and I do air quotations, cleanup provision, Mr. Pearl. Before we
Yes.
get into our real agenda.
Yes. So, right now we addressed the issue of the vice mayor, and it was agreed that all of the candidates would appear on the ballot for vice mayor and not be permitted to remove themselves from consideration, and that if somebody chose to post-election advocate that position, that the role would the office of vice mayor would then be filled by the person receiving the next highest amount of votes during the vice mayoral election. Currently, the charter has a provision dealing with the ascension of the vice mayor to the mayor's seat. And it provides that if the office of vice mayor is vacated, that the council itself would choose the next vice mayor from amongst its members, which happened. I want to clarify that it's the intent to be consistent with the way the vice mayor, a vacancy in the vice mayor position is filled, that it will consistently be the person who received the next highest number of votes, in lieu of the council in certain circumstances choosing its own. And just having it be a consistent process in lieu of, one, if somebody resigns, or two, if they move up in the situation they move up to become mayor. And I just wanted some clarification that we were looking at the consistent filling of a vacancy through whoever received the next highest number of votes. Is that the sense of the group?
So I guess the question is, are we having a discussion about this now, or are you just kind of wrapping up what we've had already?
I'm sort of wrapping up what we had. We already discussed that the vice mayor, everyone would appear on the vice mayor's ballot. And then if somebody chose that after post-election that they didn't want to be vice mayor for whatever their personal reason was, that it would just go to the next highest vote getter.
Mm-hmm.
However, the current charter, in the provisions dealing with the vacancy of the mayor, discusses the vice mayor moving up, and then the council selecting from amongst the body who would fill the seat or the role of the vice mayor, because the vice mayor had moved up. I'm asking, yes, sir.
Refresh my memory, please. What is the rationale that we're forcing everybody to run for vice mayor, whether they want to or not?
And I'd like to chime in on that as well. I think I wasn't on the charter review when you guys had the discussion.
It was I believe it was one of the first things that we tackled. And Mayor, if you want to, and I'm sorry, the recollection, I think there was concern at the time the discussion went to, there may be politics involved in deciding who's going to run versus not run, and it's positioning it this way and placing everybody on the ballot would eliminate some of that.
To a certain extent, it was, the thought of the people need to be able to choose from among the entire council ballot. It took political favors out of the equation, and nor does it impose a requirement for anyone to go out and affirmatively run or accept that position. So, and if you don't have those minutes, Councilman Maldonado, Madam Clerk, if you could get those to
I recall
him.
the discussion. I think that was right before I was sworn in, and I kind of,
You were there, I think, but.
yeah, so I'll chime in after you finish there.
So this body, approved a scenario that anyone on the final council ballot is also in the vice mayor's race, but if the winner declined to accept that designation, it would default to the second place finisher and on down the line. So if that's the scenario we're gonna have for the selection of vice mayor in an election scenario, then I think what Mr. Pearl is saying is to be consistent. If the vice mayor accedes to the mayorship or the council member holding the title leaves council, then consistency would seem to mandate that we look to the results of the most recent vice mayor ballot to automatically determine who's next in line to be vice mayor rather than the political whims of the council.
Mr.
Mr.
Mayor, is some provision that people can say, I don't want the position? For instance, what if citizens vote for somebody thinking that they vote for somebody to be vice mayor, and then that person turns out to say, I don't want it, so those votes are wasted. That people are being misled.
If I could just chime in 1 second, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
I will speak from my experience on this matter. I actually, you were correct. I was sitting in the meeting the day of when you guys had this discussion. I really didn't chime in. And I'd like to say that if this moves forward the way it is that you guys have agreed to, I agree to what you're saying, that, may it be the order of votes. I could agree with that. Now, what I just wanted to chime in and at least, get on the record and saying that, I remember when in my first re-election run, I recall that, if you recall that time, I actually won in the primary. And, what I did is that prior to that, I didn't want any confusion, nor did I want the position of the vice mayor's seat. I didn't sell it to anyone. I didn't make a deal to anyone. I get what you're saying, and I agree. I've heard that.
Deals are made.
Right.
Let's be
clear. Yeah, I'm okay with that. People have that, but all deals are made when they're campaigning, right? You're going to run with me. I'm going to run with you. We're going to pose this guy. So campaigning and deals in that sense are being made, right? You just can't sell it. You can't do something illegal, but you guys trade amongst each other, right? As a ticket. Now, what I did not want is that I wanted to win my seat. I wanted to be a council member, and I just wanted to serve. And I didn't want the confusion that Mr. Craig just brought up, because let's also bring into recollection history of what happened in the past, where we had a council member that, went for her seat as well as vice mayor, and there was confusion of this system. And overall, even in the last campaign, I've always had people ask, how this works out, because for some reason it's not clearly defined, where I wanted to remove myself from that confusion. I just wanted people to say, look, Elvis Maldonado for council, and that's it. I was concerned that I would get caught up and win the vice mayor seat and then lose my council seat like what happened in the past. So, and again, I removed myself from that. I didn't want to be the vice mayor. I didn't want, if something happened to the mayor and then I had to go in there, I wasn't ready for that, right? I was okay with having more senior people like John Burgess at the time or others go for that position. I was okay with that. So I, for the record, just want to speak on my reason as to why I did not put my name on there, and to bring the awareness, and maybe that's something that we need to figure out and make and define, where there's not a confusion on the voting process, because people says, because you have to tell vote for me as council member, but also vote for me for vice mayor. And if recall, am I correct by saying was it Amanda Gardner or was it someone else who was the person, Mayor? If you could bring that back to memory, that won the vice mayor position but lost their seat, in essence, lost the campaign. Do you recall that happening?
I think that Mr. Bateman may have won the vice mayor's race, but lost the election to Amanda Garner in 2003. That's the only possibility I can think of.
Right. So I know that Amanda Gardner's name was on it. I didn't know who the person was now that you said it, but that, like, I heard that.
He lost his seat, but won the title. Correct.
So there was obviously or clearly, I would assume, a confusion. You're like, okay, I like Amanda, so I'll vote for here, and then we'll get Steve and the vice mayor, and in essence, he lost. There's that confusion that I was aware of that also played as a factor as why I pulled my name from that. That was my first re-election run. Obviously, you remember the history of that race and what I went through. I was like, I just want to run for this seat. I want to serve as a council member, and maybe in my last term, I then run for mayor. So I had the ability to pull my name on there, and rightfully so. I heard other colleagues as well say that, you know what, I don't want the vice mayor. I just want to be a council member. So I respect and understand what the mayor is saying in reference of trading that position. Yes, let's be honest about it. That has happened. Now, I don't know how, like I said, but there's all type of deals or kind of slates that are formed in the races as well. So, but that's it. I just wanted to be on the record and have that discussion and say, if you guys already voted for it, I wasn't there. I'm not gonna, I'm not here to bring it back, but I just want to be on the record as to why I did not run for the vice mayor seat back in 2013. And again, I think that there has to be some type of clarity so that, I guess, in essence, if you put everyone's name on there, then they'll be on it twice. And hopefully there's not a confusion. Again, I know that it happened once. Once for me is enough, because that's obviously a big race, to run a whole year of campaigning or 6 months, whatever the time and effort is that you put in there. And then all of a sudden, you have your name on a vice mayor, but you lost because they didn't vote for you over here. That hurts. So
my political guru tells me I'm wrong, that it never happened. It might have been it. So I don't know. I'm going to go back and do the research.
Right.
That's a question.
And you may be thinking, although Ms. Sierra got a sufficient number of votes to get a 4-year term, she got caught up in that transitional thing.
Mm-hmm.
The transitional seat, that may be what we're thinking of, but nonetheless, and council may or may not put forward to the ballot
right.
The first question.
Right.
But Mr. Pearl and I wanted, for sake of consistency, to bring this question forward this afternoon.
Right.
For no other reason, to be consistent.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Like, if I was on council, I would then speak to our experiences, and then we would have that debate. And so, in this same realm, like I said, you guys already kind of voted to agree to it. I don't know how the other colleagues feel after hearing my position, but just like I said, for me, it was like I didn't want, like I always said, like, the vice mayor, like, I'm okay with not being a vice mayor the first time around. The second time around, of course, I wanted it, but then that's a whole different story. Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, taking the personalities out of it and hopefully the deals, I'm just concerned that it's misleading to voters. If voters see everybody on the council is running for vice mayor, and some of people do not want that, that misleads the voters. The voters should know whether somebody wants to be vice mayor or not, so they can vote appropriately.
Well, and I understand that, but in that regard, if I'm on a council member ballot in a given year, and on the vice mayor's chart, if this goes forward and passes, then isn't it incumbent on me as a candidate to say, hey, I endorse Councilwoman X for vice mayor. I don't want to be vice mayor. Don't vote for me.
Yes, I agree with that, and I would hope that candidates have that integrity to do so.
I would just chime in to say that I think that's would be a great idea in the sense of, hey, vote for me, but we know that when we're doing campaign materials, we're not going to say, hey, don't vote for me, vote for X person, and that's where a lot of people, remember, the people you have voters who are very in the know of what's happening. And so if I say, don't vote for me for vice mayor and vote for this person for vice mayor, the people in the know that are really connected okay, we'll take that into consideration. But for the majority of the people who don't, that just, they'll wait for the ballots to come in or they'll go out to voting, they're not going to know that I support person X. They're just going to say, well, I see your name on the ballot and I'm just going to punch that in. So I think that the idea, what you're saying, I think it's a nice idea in the sense of, but I think you and I understand the reality is that when we have to create campaign material, we also, if we have to then, what extra message that we have to put in there that says don't vote for me for vice mayor or vote for the next person is something I don't think that we're going to do. We try to keep our message very to the point when it comes to campaigning.
Can I say something, please, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
If we're gonna
If you must. Yeah.
if we're gonna use that highest number of votes, is that only for that particular ballot item or total, consistent throughout the entire election?
No, it's for the vice mayor title.
Okay. So then it would go in the hierarchy. Whoever got the most votes is the vice mayor. So if you guys ever considered just removing it completely and just letting the entire voting system, whoever gets the most votes, utilize that? Or is our districts too big or too small?
That doesn't work under a district scenario because what if someone is unopposed? Then there are no votes for that person. Under the old at-large system, that's exactly what used to happen, that the person who got the most votes in a pick-four ballot became the vice mayor. And when we converted to residential area seats, which we call districts, we had to figure out a mechanism to affirmatively choose a vice mayor because highest number of votes was not really, that wasn't in play any longer.
Okay. So
Mr.
our
Mayor,
question is, do we avoid confusion is what we're really trying to decide here.
Well, not confusion. I think it's more of, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's just more of uniformity is what the mayor is seeking. And that when you guys had that conversation. But again, because it's being brought up again, Mr. Craig wanted to chime in on it, and I did as well, because I wasn't
Well, not
able
that
to speak in.
issue. This is a consistency question.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'll end this. It just seems to me that there should be an option for candidates to have their name removed as a candidate for vice mayor. They should not be forced to have their name up for vice mayor. I agree with you. It should be incumbent upon them during the election process, the campaign process, to say, hey, I don't want it. But I think it makes much more sense to say, please remove my name as a candidate for vice mayor. They should have that option.
If I ever run for council and not wanting to run for vice mayor, I wouldn't want my name on there to avoid confusion.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
we've had that we've had that vote.
Right.
This is solely with respect to if the office of vice mayor becomes vacant, are we going to propose, are we going to leave it the way it is and let council appoint a vice mayor? Or are we going to refer back to the last election?
I would agree to what you're saying, which we would, if it goes, let's say if the council agrees to this part where we're going to, that everyone's name is on the ballot. If everyone's name is on the ballot, and then we're going to, well, if the first person doesn't want to be the mayor, then it goes to the second highest voter. I think it should go that process in choosing the vice mayor, as opposed to, the inside, just everyone saying, well, I believe Julio should do it, and then Mr. Craig says, well, I think Mallory should do it, and then we're having that type of scenario. It's kind of, I didn't like that. We had that process, obviously, and I wasn't too fond of it. And so I would agree to the sense of going through your position on your winning, if that's the process. But if it's not, then we need to have that discussion as well.
Well, and let's think through this. Let's say, for sake of argument, that our first question with respect to every name being on the ballot does not pass muster at the council level. That is not to say that we can mandate that a vice mayor vacancy is filled by looking back to the most recent election, because it is very rare that the vice mayorship is unopposed.
Yeah, I mean, if we stick to our current situation, so another way to look at it, everyone, is that if we stick to our current situation right now, where you have the ability to be on the ballot or not, if I remove my name from the ballot, then obviously I won't be in that position to be chosen as the vote get. Well, let me take that back. We could take that back. Wait a second. We could, but we would have to default on who was the highest vote getter overall, not for the mayorship. So it would go to, so let me play out the scenario. I'm running for council, and I remove my name for the vice mayorship, right? And only 2 people keep their names out of there, right? The election happens. I clearly am not, I didn't go for vice mayor. I won my seat, and then we're saying that the first person does want to be vice mayor. Then if we were looking to default at numbers, we would look at the numbers of the election process, like who was the highest vote getters in the election. It's kind of the way we're sitting down now on the dais, right? The person that sits to the right of the mayor is the vice mayor, and the person that sits to the left is the person with the second highest votes, and then it kind of goes that way.
Not this go round, and
No?
you've got your directions wrong.
Well, but you know what I mean.
And look, when I was there the first time, and we'll get out in the weeds here for a minute, one of those days, when I was first elected, I was vice mayor, and it was in the old horse race election, the pick 4 scenario, okay? I was vice mayor, and I was to the mayor's left. Judy Waldman was the second highest vote getter, and she sat to the right of the mayor. When I attempted to seat that way this time, such that Mr. Fletcher, as the highest vote getter in all the council races, would be to my right, I was denied that by the hierarchy in management, legal, clerk, and apparently in council.
Right. So we're having that. So that's the discussion we're having now. We're trying.
No, that's just kind of as an aside. But Elvis, remember, you can't default if you're going to fill a vacancy in vice mayor. Each council race stands on its own. And again, if let's say Steve Shelley were in the mix and he ran unopposed, he has no votes. So it doesn't put him in contention to be vice mayor. If you get reelected by unopposed, then that throws the system off. That's correct. That's the kink in the armor right there. It's about having one of the persons being unopposed, and then so that will mess up the process. So then what you're saying is what? Then so what's the answer to that, Matt, or anyone else that wants to? We've all heard of what's going on here. Well, okay, but
we're trying to find out.
Either way, whether or not our mandate that everyone appear on the ballot goes forward. Let's say it doesn't go forward.
Mhm.
So let's bring it forward to this scenario where I walk out of here and get run over. Well, that's not necessarily a good scenario because
Right.
there wasn't a
You got
race.
hired for Washington. Let's do the, you got hired to go to Washington.
Well,
We don't-
okay, no, let's
I don't like the
let's
truck
say-
hit. I don't like
no,
truck.
let's say Roscoe Warren's the mayor, I'm the vice mayor, and Judy Waldman was the second highest vote getter in the just ended vice mayor's race, which was accurate in 2005. That was the outcome. Okay? If under the discussion we're having for consistency, if Mayor Warren had departed his seat and I became mayor by virtue of being vice mayor, then under this scenario, Ms. Waldman, as the next highest vote
Nope.
getter, would automatically be vice mayor without it being put into the politics of a council decision. That's where I'm trying to get us today. And it would be, if our prior vote goes forward at the council level, this conversation makes them consistent.
Okay, I think I'm comfortable with that.
But even if the first question that we had about requiring you to be on the ballot doesn't go, and this does go forward, it creates certainty and, in my mind, fairness that the people's second choice for vice mayor was Sean Fletcher, or
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
Let's make sure he gets that seat.
All right.
Or
So we're just
Yeah.
trying to get consistency now, whether this vote goes forward, we want consistency. Whether it does not go forward, we still need consistency on the process of becoming the vice mayor.
So
Right,
that would have meant if, in today's scenario, Patricia Fairclough, since she ran unopposed, Sean Fletcher would have been vice mayor, not Patricia Fairclough. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, Sean got
No.
the most number of votes, but vice mayor is determined by a separate vice mayor ballot.
Yeah, but I'm talking, if you told the scenario of Warren went somewhere, you moved up, next number highest votes automatically gets determined to be vice mayor.
It's vice mayor. Well, yeah, the next number of votes for vice mayor. And it is a rare occurrence that the vice mayor position is unopposed. I can't recall when it ever was. There was
Okay.
never a vice mayor by acclamation until this time.
Okay, I understand.
And what is wrong with people declaring that they want to run for vice mayor, and then whoever gets the most votes as a declarant for vice mayor, that they then become the vice mayor, they're elected to be vice mayor?
I didn't follow your question there, Mr. Craig.
Mr. Mayor, if instead of saying everybody's name is on there, people can declare when they're running, I'm running for district number 4 or whatever, I'm also running for vice mayor, or I'm running for district number 4, but I'm not running for vice mayor. So they're on the ballot. Only the names of people who are running for vice mayor will be indicated, and then whoever gets the most votes for that office will be the vice mayor.
Okay. That's true. So, I guess the flip side of that is if you choose not to put your name on the ballot as vice mayor, you're potentially forfeiting the right to become vice mayor should that position become empty during the next 2 years.
Well, if you didn't want to be vice mayor to begin with, why would you want to be vice mayor by default?
Well, there you go.
So I believe that people should declare whether they want to be vice mayor, and the voters should vote on who should be vice mayor.
Well, I do too, and taking that logic forward, I think that in the event of a vacancy, the voters' will in the last election should be respected and not left to the whims of council.
I'm okay with that.
I mean, whatever happens with the question we've already dealt with, if this goes forward, that maintains that hierarchy.
Okay, motion to move, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So your motion is that a provision be drafted to be consistent with our prior vice mayor, ballot question.
Correct.
And with respect to filling a vacancy in the office of vice mayor. Do we have a second for that?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Second by Ms. Mallory. Any further discussion? Is there anyone who wants to be recorded as a no? All right. Let's, Mr. Councilman Maldonado, are you back? I don't know if the rest of you saw his message.
Oh, what did it say?
He said he had to step out. He would be right back. He's been pretty vocal. Let's let him. Let's hold the vote if we can until he signs back in.
I'm back in. I don't know where you guys left off at.
Oh, we left off. Councilman Guzman moved language to be consistent in the event that we need to fill a vacancy in the office of vice mayor. And it was seconded by Ms. Mallory, and we're about to have a vote.
All right, let's roll it.
All right, so does anyone want to be reflected as a no on this question? So let the record show that this matter went forward unanimously. Now, back to the regular agenda.
Oh, we haven't started yet, you mean?
All right. So now we're at what we've termed item 3A, the resign to run provisions. And just to get our minds focused on what Mr. Pearl's going to talk about is the black hole of what happens if an interim mayor relinquishes the right to go back to the council seat that has a remaining term to run for mayor in his or her own right. That's A. Or B, a council member elects to leave midterm to seek the office of mayor. I think the conversation we had, my goal is to establish some clarity such that a vacancy in that event would be filled in that upcoming election, rather than by, under the current scenario, appointment, or if our special election question is ultimately passed, to have a special election shortly following a regular election. So, Mr. Pearl? Matt?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was still on mute. I apologize. What we have now is a scenario within which if a sitting council member with 2 years remaining on their term, they're in their first half of their 4-year term, decides that they would like to resign and run for the office of mayor. The state's resign to run law would apply, making the effective date of their resignation the day that they would take office. And if they didn't, and they would have to provide that notice 10 days prior to qualifying. But if they elect, in the alternative, if they do not provide notice within 10 days prior to qualifying, they can make that resignation effective, let's say during the last day of qualifying, and go in, and it would be impossible at that point logistically to fill the remaining 2 years of that term on the upcoming mayoral election, which would, if this were to pass, necessitate a special election in all likelihood, 60, 90 days after, within which we already had an election, just because of the logistics of that. So what the mayor had proposed is examining whether or not there's a will to impose an additional, by charter, requirement that a council member or, interim mayor who decides to relinquish the remaining term of his council seat to run for the seat of mayor, and which they would be willing to give up the remaining 2 years of the term to provide additional notice to the council, to the clerk or the city, so that the remaining 2 years of their term may be filled at that election, so the city could avoid the expense of a special election if they chose to resign basically at the end of qualifying, when it would be too late for us to get something on the ballot and do qualifying for the last 2 years of their seat. And I think the mayor had pointed to a provision that had previously been provided to you. Mr. Mayor, I think you were looking at South Miami. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry.
It was South Miami, yes.
Okay, so a charter provision in South Miami that requires that a 15-day window before the deadline for qualifying the next general election for them to notify the city. Now, I think I'd like the clerk to chime in on the logistics of the time frame within which we would have to notify the supervisor of elections, but I think the discussion is, do we want to impose that additional time requirement, the additional notice requirement on a sitting council person or interim mayor to notify the city so that the city has enough opportunity to work with the supervisor of elections to get that to fill the remaining 2 years of that council member or interim mayor's term at that election, so the city does not have to incur the expense of running a special election that would occur likely not that long after.
I would like a historical perspective, please. Mr. Mayor, I would
Then I
refer
defer-
to you. You've always been here longer than most of us. Have ever in your living memory, has a member of the city council resigned in midterm to run for mayor? Has that happened? And if
Yes.
so, how often?
Yes. I did.
Right.
I did in 2007. And we all know what that mayoral election result was. And then what it further springboarded into was that the council seat that I vacated was then filled after the election by appointment. So what we're really talking about is that if, as a council member, I need to come in and give enough advance notice of my intention to relinquish that seat such that it can be filled for the remaining 2 years in the upcoming election where I'm going to run off and try to become mayor. We don't have that now, nor do we have a provision. Let's put it in real terms. When Mr. Shelley became interim mayor, at election time, he had two choices: return to his council seat for the remainder of the 4-year term, which, at that point was 2, or give up his right to return to that council seat and seek the office of mayor. So again, as in my council resignation scenario, Mr. Shelley's council seat under our current charter was deemed to be vacant, but would not have been filled by the just finished election. It would have been by appointment. And what I see at South Miami is what it effectively says is that if you're the interim mayor and you're going to give up your right to go back to your council seat, or you're in the middle of a council term and you have to resign under state law. Now remember, you have to resign under state law, and that's a different time frame. South Miami says you've got to give notice by a certain day in order to be qualified to seek that office. With the result of that being there being plenty of time for new challengers for the seat you're vacating to come run for that seat in the election that is about to be pending, rather than have appointment fiascos later.
Well, that seems fair to the voters.
I agree. It's really, this is for fairness to the voters and people who want to run for office and don't know until the last minute. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that Mr. Shelley is a very strong seat holder. You know, people wouldn't necessarily challenge that or even give a thought to that seat being open. Now, if we enacted a provision that said, in order to qualify to run, you have to give notice 15 days before the first day of qualifying, that gives newcomers 20 days to get themselves together and get in and qualify to run for the vacated seat. And it avoids an appointment if we don't have special elections. And if we do get special elections, it avoids the cost of a special election. To me, it's that common sense solution. But it's
why would anybody be opposed to that?
Pardon?
Why would anybody be opposed to allowing voters to vote in somebody with a vacant seat?
I
don't know
agree,
why
it's
anybody
it's not called out in the charter, so we do not have that luxury to just say that's what happens.
It's not defined at the moment.
That's right. It's undefined. Totally
So
silent.
let's define it.
That.
How many days are in the qualifying period?
5 business days.
And
For
what?
example, South Miami says, I think, 10 days. And my
15.
preference would be, since the state resigned to run law is in terms of the first day to qualify, our language should track that language. And we're not expanding the resign to run law. We can't do that. We're creating another level of another check the box qualification to locally run. And that qualification, I guess, in shorthand would be, is that if you hold office now and you are required to resign to run, you must have given notice further back in time to allow for a regular election and others to come forward to run for that seat you're vacating.
And so the way South Miami did it was that they just added 15 days prior to the first qualification day. Am I correct?
It was a period of days. I don't remember if they put it in terms of the last or the first. My personal preference for consistency with the resign to run law would be the first, that your time frame would run to the first day of qualification. It gives challengers a greater period of time to get themselves together. What's wrong with notice? You know, no one's resigning any earlier. We're not requiring anyone to resign earlier. We're requiring candidates to give notice that they will be leaving.
In essence, you know, in essence, what we're asking is, like, we just want to, in simple terms, we just want to make sure that we don't get caught in a pickle where no one can run for that seat, you know, and we need to give enough time for other people to qualify to run for that seat that is going to be vacant, because automatically, resign to run law kicks in, that basically says if you're going to run for a position and you're holding the position, then you have to give up your seat.
And our charter is silent on how that, well,
It's not defined.
it's not defined.
Right. And so but in essence, what we want to do is that we want to make sure that we don't go to a special election.
Right.
Exactly.
Other people did not know that, hey, I had an opportunity to run, but because we didn't do it with enough time, I missed the window of qualification.
Well, but even that, Mr. Councilman Maldonado, let's say for sake of argument that our special election question is not approved, so we stay within the appointment scenario
Mm-hmm.
without bringing this forward and having it passed. Under the Shelley example, the Northwest seat would be filled by appointment later, which is really, to me, nonsensical if you're about to have an election when you know it's going to be vacant.
Well, again, it just seems common sense that someone should have to declare that they're gonna run for another seat, and therefore their seat will be vacant, and give time for candidates to run for the vacant seat. It just seems common sense. I don't know why anybody would be opposed to requiring that.
So we have a motion then to cover those scenarios where an interim mayor gives up his or her seat, or a sitting council member seeks the office of mayor, that they need to provide notice not less than 15 days prior to the first day to qualify to run for the office.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask you, I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor, would this apply to every seat, not just the interim mayor, but any seat?
Well, yeah, if you're sitting in a council seat and your term is not in sync with the mayoral term and you want to run for mayor, you've got to resign your council seat in order to run for mayor.
And you have to declare that.
Yes.
And
I
is
so
this
moved.
only for, I'm sorry, and is this only for the mayor, for someone seeking the mayor's seat?
No, it's if midway through your council term, you decided you wanted to run for mayor and thereby create a vacancy in your council seat, it would apply to that as well.
I guess I would ask Councilman Maldonado, advertising early or letting everybody know 15 days prior, you may not have wanted to do that, but I haven't been in that seat for me to understand why a person sitting there would not want to disclose that information 15 days prior. You know what I mean?
I don't have experience. Maybe someone with experience would be able to chime in on that. So,
yeah, we don't, sometimes people don't get to see the other side to understand why you may not want to disclose early.
what do you got on there, Mayor?
I don't know why you wouldn't. I mean, look, I hate to be jaded and pessimistic, but sometimes political games are played to keep others out of contention.
Yeah.
But, to me, and I agree with Mr. Craig, this is about fairness to the voters.
So would it be, let's just be open. I'm always about, let's just be real. Let's be open. Let's talk about it. So maybe the bad case scenario, Mr. Guzman, is someone would not disclose it because maybe if they didn't win, then they had maybe the opportunity to go back. Might be a scenario.
Okay.
I don't think that plays out. So right now we've got a motion on the table. Let's get a second, and then we'll have the rest of the discussion.
Oh.
Before we get.
No, but, the only reason I was asking that is so that I could finalize my decision, knowing both sides of the coin.
Okay, well, let's fast forward to a scenario you're familiar with. And again, we have the charter that we have now. Steve Shelley could wait until 3:58 on the last day to qualify to decide whether or not he was going to go back to his seat or seek the office of mayor. Okay?
Right.
So that really, to me, chills the ability of those who may want to seek either the council seat he's vacating or a vacant mayor's seat that doesn't have an incumbent running, from getting themselves ready and making that decision.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. There was a lot of people asking, are you going to run or are you coming back to your seat? You know, it was, well, I wouldn't say there were a lot of people, but I know I asked myself the question.
Well, and interesting, contrary to popular belief, there would not have been an election for you to run in for the Northwest seat under the legal framework we now live under, had Mr. Shelley elected to run for mayor in his own right.
Okay, so we're clarifying that scenario so that doesn't happen in the future.
Correct.
Okay.
So do we have
Can I get a second?
Mr. Craig?
I moved. I'd like to get a second.
I'll second that.
All right.
Okay, so who seconded it?
John Moss did.
No, thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Moss. You've been quiet today. Okay, so is there any further discussion on that?
Mr. Mayor, can I jump in for one quick second? I'm sorry. With respect to defining the actual time frame, can we make the motion that we want to impose this, but I'd like some time for the clerk to work with the supervisor of elections so that we can define the time frame specifically within which they will require the information and get it on the ballot? So can we just have the motion for the moment be that we will be imposing this requirement, and the number of days, if it's okay, I'd like to bring back to you next week so that Liz has a chance to speak to the supervisor. I know South Miami has 15 days, but I don't want to rely on them and assume that that's sufficient for the supervisor.
Okay.
I mean,
So we're gonna, what we'll find out is the minimum number of days and work backwards from that.
Yes.
But the vote will be on the concept
Yes.
of creating an election scenario in the event of a vacancy under
And-
those circumstances.
And we could even go ask for 30 days, right? So just,
We can be as creative as we want to be, but we're going to determine what the minimum would be.
okay, what the minimum would be. Roger that.
I guess Mr. Pearl wants to make sure that 15 days plus the 5 days of qualifying would be sufficient for the county to get an unexpected item on the ballot.
Correct.
Because they know what our cycle is, and we have X number of council seats and a mayor, and now we're potentially throwing another race onto the ballot they've got to print. And if that takes it to a second page, then there are additional expenses, all of those kinds of things. All right, so we have a motion and a second on that concept, leaving in abeyance the number of days in advance that will be required to be determined at our next meeting. So does anyone wish to be recorded as a no vote on that? Thank you. Let's record reflect we have unanimity on that. Well, if you thought we had fun up to this point, just wait until next week when we tackle what we didn't get to today. And
Term limits.
just so that, and that I would foresee it could take the entire hour and a half. And that is a discussion as to the scenario of jumping from council member after 12 years to running for mayor, or what the restrictions would be as if you didn't serve a full term limit as council member, what would be the limitations on jumping over to mayor. And I don't want to get into any details today. You've got some packets in front of you, and we will, I think we'll reserve the next meeting for a follow-up with the determination of the number of days for the resignation to run for councilman or mayor, interim mayor, as well as this issue of calculation going back and forth between mayor and council member as it relates to the stated term limits that now exist. Now, I want to share with everyone, in case you didn't see it, the clerk has informed me that our drop dead date for council to give this package to the supervisor of elections is July 31st. So I think that after next week, we're probably going to have to, have the attorneys come back and identify, and if we have time next week, identify any of these other loose ends, such as we spent over an hour today on, so that we can get that package to council for final approval to go on the ballot or not by July 31st.
I got it.
May I interject, Mr. Mayor, if, on the term limits? I certainly hope Mr. Moss will be able to participate in that because I respect his experience in this.
And he was there in '02, and I look forward to to his input on that. And I'm just going to let you all talk when it comes to those issues. So with that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Oh, we're going to set the next meeting for Monday. What would next Monday be? The 1st?
The 1st.
Monday, June 1st at 5:30. Now, if we can do it, is there anyone who's not comfortable meeting in person? Are we all good meeting in person next week if we can otherwise coordinate it?
Yeah.
I would like to work toward that.
Mr. Mayor, I completely agree, but I would also I would expect that we would take some certain precautions for safety measures, health precautions.
I'm going to sit right next to you, Timothy.
Okay, here we go. You got it. I'm a city seal right there. Okay, so if we can do it, it will be here in the council chambers with appropriate social distancing plus. And if not, we'll do another one of these remote meetings. So having said that, we have a motion to adjourn.
Move it.
We have a motion, and I think I heard a second to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all for a long and productive meeting.